The night Adaeze Okonkwo saved Park Ji-ho's life, she was wearing the wrong shoes. They were sensible black flats, scuffed at the toe, the kind that blended into marble floors and ivory tablecloths without a trace. She had bought them secondhand from a market stall in Itaewon 3 weeks earlier. On the same afternoon, she accepted the live-in housekeeper position at the Park estate in Songbuk-dong. She had stood in the stall for approximately 4 minutes, turning the left shoe over in her hands, inspecting the seam at the heel. The vendor had watched her with the patient expression of someone who had learned that people who inspected seams were people who bought things that lasted. She had bought the shoes. She had bought them because they were practical, and because practical was the word she had been building her life around for the better part of 3 years, since the day she packed everything she owned into 2 suitcases and flew from Abuja to Seoul on a one-way ticket funded by 5 months of aggressive saving and 1 carefully worded loan from her mother that neither of them referred to as a loan. The shoes were, in the architecture of her current life, precisely what she needed. They were also, on the night of the Park Industries board dinner, the wrong shoes for the marble floors of the reception hall, not because they were inappropriate in appearance, but because they were quiet. Quieter than she had expected. Quieter, specifically, than the clicking heels of the serving staff who had been hired for the evening, which meant that when she moved across the reception hall at 9:14 p.m. carrying a tray of barley tea, she moved in a silence that was almost absolute, and the man near the fireplace did not hear her coming. She would think about this later. She would think about it in the specific, crystalline way that you think about the small things that turned out to be the hinges on which everything else swung. The shoes. The silence. The particular angle at which she had crossed the reception hall, which was not the most direct route from the kitchen. The most direct route was through the west corridor, but was the route she had taken because one of the flower arrangements on the sideboard near the east wall had been listing slightly to the left since 8 p.m., and she had been intending to correct it since 8 p.m. and had not yet found a moment. The flower arrangement. The shoes. The silence. She was 3 steps from the sideboard when she saw him. Not Park Ji-ho. She knew where he was. She had been tracking the geography of the room since the guests arrived at 7, the way she tracked every room she worked in, with the quiet, constant attention of someone who understood that a room was a living thing, and that living things required watching. Ji-ho was near the center of the room, speaking with 2 men from the latte partnership who had been the primary business purpose of the evening. He was, as he always was, entirely composed, the specific, architectural composure of a man who had learned, over many years and through many difficult rooms, to make his stillness into a form of authority. The man she saw was standing at the far end of the reception hall. He was wearing the gray uniform of the private security staff that had arrived that afternoon for the board dinner. There were 12 of them in total, and she had logged all 12 when they came through the service entrance because logging things was how she operated. This man was number 7. She had assigned him the number, without assigning him a name, as she did with all temporary staff. Number, position, relevant observations. Number 7. Tall, dark-haired, stationed near the east wall, quiet in the specific way that people are quiet when they are waiting for something rather than when they are simply waiting. She had noted this distinction at 7:30 p.m. and filed it under monitor. She was monitoring now. Number 7 was speaking to number 3, shorter, broader, stationed by the main entrance, in the low, unhurried way of 2 colleagues discussing something mundane. They had the body language of men who had worked together before. This was in itself unremarkable. What was remarkable was the hand. Number 7's right hand kept drifting. 2 inches toward the inside of his jacket. Then back. Then 2 inches again. Not reaching. Not yet. Not with the room as full as it was, and Ji-ho flanked by his own security detail. Rehearsing. She had grown up watching her father's hands. Adaeze Okonkwo had been a security man, private contracts, corporate clients, the kind of work that required you to understand, before anyone else in a room, when a situation was about to change its nature. He had been a quiet man who communicated most effectively through the air he displaced when he moved, and he had taught her, before she could fully read, that the hands told you first. Always the hands, before the face, before the body. Hands were honest in a way that the rest of a person had learned to manage. Number 7's hands were very honest. She set the tray down on the sideboard without looking at it. She crossed the room. 12 steps. She counted them without deciding to, the way you count things when your mind is working faster than your awareness of it. She did not run. Running changed the room. It shifted every head toward you, altered the atmosphere, gave information to the wrong people at the wrong moment. She moved at the pace of a woman going about her work, purposeful without urgency, and she reached Park Ji-ho at the moment when he had turned from the latte men and was beginning the slow, social drift across the room that would bring him within 3 feet of number 7 and number 7's rehearsing hand. She stepped smoothly into his path. She bent as if adjusting the small table arrangement at the room's center. There was a flower arrangement here too, a lower one, requiring less adjustment but providing adequate cover. She said, without looking up, without changing the register or volume of her voice by a single note. "There's a problem with your car, sir. Your driver asked me to tell you. Urgently." A pause. The pause had a specific weight to it. She felt Ji-ho's attention land on her the way a spotlight lands, not searching, not sweeping, but arriving with full certainty at its target. She kept her eyes on the flowers, kept her hands steady, kept her face the careful, neutral surface it had been trained, over many years of difficult rooms, to be. "My car," he said. His voice was low, even. A voice that had learned, over a long time, to give precisely nothing away. "Yes, sir." The driver said to come now. Another beat, longer than the first. She was aware, in the peripheral field of her attention, of number 7 registering the interruption, registering it and recalculating. She was aware of the small, collective shift in the room as Ji-ho's security detail moved with him in the natural way of water moving around a disturbance. "Excuse me," Ji-ho said to the room, and she heard the specific, organizational sound of the evening reorganizing itself around his departure from one position to another, and she straightened and moved back toward the kitchen without looking at anyone. She was shaking by the time she reached the service corridor. She pressed her back against the wall. The corridor was narrow and smelled of cleaning products and the residual cedarwood from the candles burning in the reception hall, and she breathed it all in and breathed it out, and told herself, with the practical, unsentimental voice she had inherited from her mother, "You did a thing. The thing is done. Now keep working." She went back to the kitchen. She made more tea. She arranged a second round of the small snacks that the caterers had prepared and which had been going quickly because Ji-ho's guests were the type of people who ate at events when the food was genuinely good and did not bother when it wasn't, which she had registered as a meaningful data point about the quality of the household standards. She was plating the third round when she heard, through the kitchen service door, the sound of the evening's security being quietly, efficiently, comprehensively addressed. Not dramatically. Not loudly. The Songbuk-dong estate was not the kind of house where things happened dramatically. Things happened precisely and thoroughly, and afterward the surfaces were clean. Number 7 and his companions, she estimated 3, from the sounds, were removed from the premises with a professionalism that suggested Ji-ho's actual security team had been watching number 7 for longer than she had. The dinner continued.
Subscribe right now.
This is the night that changes everything, and we're just at the beginning. She was drying the last of the barley teacups when the kitchen door opened. It was 41 minutes after the incident in the reception hall. The guests had departed. The board dinner had concluded at its scheduled time, without drama, without the kind of drama that had been rehearsed near the east wall, and the catering staff had departed, and the temporary security staff had been replaced by the estate's permanent team, and the house had settled into the specific, considered quiet that it maintained after events. She had cleaned the reception hall. She had straightened the flower arrangements. She had returned the furniture to its precise, documented positions. She had done all of this with the methodical focus of a woman who understands that work is the best container for the kind of adrenaline that takes a long time to leave a body. Park Ji-ho stood in the kitchen doorway. He had loosened his tie by exactly 1 centimeter. She noticed this the way she noticed everything, which was automatically, and without deciding to. It was the only visible alteration he had made to his appearance since the start of the evening. His suit was still impeccable. His expression was still the architectural expression, the load-bearing, structurally essential composure that she had observed in 3 weeks of working in his household, to be as fundamental to him as the marrow of his bones. He looked at her with the full, direct attention that was, she had learned this in 3 weeks, his natural mode of engagement. Park Ji-ho did not look at things casually. He looked at them completely, or he did not look at them at all. You noticed his hand, he said. It was not a question. Yes, she said. She had turned to face him when he came in. She was still holding the teacup. Her hands were steady. The adrenaline had finished its work and left, as it always did, the particular calm of a body that has done what was required of it. The right hand, he said. The drift toward the inside of the jacket. Yes. How long had you been watching him? She thought about this honestly. Since 7:30, she said. I noticed the way he was waiting. It was different from how the other staff waited. He was quiet for a moment. He had his hands in the pockets of his suit jacket, a posture she had not seen him adopt before, slightly less formal than his usual bearing, slightly more human. How long have you been in security work? He said. I haven't, she said. My father was. I learned to watch. Your father. He did private security contracts in Lagos. Corporate clients. She paused. He used to say the hands tell you first. Ji-ho looked at her for a moment with an expression she could not immediately categorize. Not the architectural expression, not quite, but something adjacent to it. Something that the architectural expression was performing on top of. What is your name? He said, as if this were something he had been thinking about asking. Adaeze. Sir. Adaeze. He said it carefully. Not hesitatingly. He was not a man who hesitated, but with the specific care of someone measuring something. That means the daughter of a king in Igbo. She looked at him then. Really looked at him, for the first time since the service corridor, the first time she had allowed herself to look at him as a person rather than as the primary variable in the room she was managing. You speak Igbo? She said. No, he said. I read. He left without another word. She heard his footsteps on the marble, the specific, even rhythm of a man who moved through his own house the way he moved through everything, with the authority of someone who has made his peace with every room he inhabits. She stood in the kitchen for a long moment after the footsteps faded. She looked at the teacup in her hands. She put it down on the counter very carefully, the way you put something down when your hands are not quite as steady as you thought. In the morning, on the kitchen counter, she found a first aid kit. She had not asked for one. She had not mentioned to anyone that she had scraped her palm on the edge of the tray when she set it down too quickly in the reception hall. It was a small scrape. She had wiped it on her apron without looking at it, and it had not bled significantly, and she had forgotten about it in the activity of the evening. He had not forgotten about it. She stood in the kitchen at 6:45 a.m. with the first aid kit on the counter and the morning light coming through the window and the cedar smell of the candles that the housekeeper before her had apparently always kept burning in the house, and which she had maintained without being asked because some things in a house are not rules but rhythms, and she felt something she had not felt in a long time. She felt seen. Not in a way she could act on. Not in a way she allowed herself to examine for more than the moment it took to name it. She was his employee. She was here on a salary and a contract and the practical mathematics of a situation that was not ambiguous. She dressed the small scrape on her palm. She put the first aid kit in the correct cabinet. She started the barley tea. She went to work. Drop a comment right now, that first aid kit. Did it get you? Tell me what you're feeling. A household tells you about its people before its people do. Adaeze had understood this since childhood. Since the years she spent at her father's older sister's house in Enugu, keeping house in exchange for her secondary school fees, learning that the rooms a family inhabited were a compressed record of everything they had felt and chosen and lost and refused to let go of. The Park estate in Songbuk-dong told her things in the first week that 3 weeks of conversation could not have conveyed. The house was large by any measure, 4 floors, 12 rooms not including the service areas, a garden that backed onto the hillside and contained, near the east wall, a white forsythia that had been there long enough to have outgrown the space it was originally given and was now, in a way that was either beautiful or in need of addressing, taking up all the room that was available to it. She had decided, on her 3rd day, that it was beautiful. She had noted this assessment and kept it to herself, because keeping assessments to herself was one of the foundational practices of a life built on watching. The house was clean. The previous housekeeper had been thorough, whatever else she had or had not been, and it was ordered in the specific, precise way of a house managed by someone who required order as a structural element rather than as an aesthetic preference. The kitchen was organized by frequency of use. The study shelves were arranged by subject, then by author's surname. The linen closet used a labeling system that she had spent 20 minutes on her second day reading carefully and which turned out to be entirely logical and also, she suspected, entirely Park Ji-ho's personal design. But underneath the order, the house told you things. It told you about the cedarwood candles. They burned in the reception hall, the living room, and the study, and only in those rooms, and she had found in the utility cabinet a stock of them that had been ordered in quantities suggesting a standing arrangement with a specific supplier, an arrangement that predated her and predated the previous housekeeper, and was not, she understood without being told, something that was open to discussion. It told you about the barley tea, the same story, a specific supplier, a standing arrangement, a practice that was maintained with the precision of something that had been someone's preference and was now, in a slightly different way, someone else's obligation. She had found the supplier's information in the household documentation and had noted it and had used it without deviation, because some things you understood without needing them explained. It told you about the photograph on the third shelf of the study bookcase. Not prominently displayed, not in a frame on a desk or on the mantelpiece where it would demand attention. On a shelf, among books, at eye level if you were standing and looking and not at eye level if you were moving through the room. A photograph of a woman laughing with her eyes closed. The laugh was very wide and apparently involuntary, the kind of laugh that arrives before you've decided to let it, and the woman's face was turned slightly away from the camera, which meant the photograph had caught something private. Something that was not being performed. She passed this photograph every time she worked in the study. She passed it the way she would pass someone in a corridor, with acknowledgement but without intrusion. A small nod, almost imperceptible. Recognition. She did not rearrange anything in the study. She dusted and replaced things in their exact positions. She had a good memory for positions. The house told you about Seo-jun. He was 6 years old and had his father's eyes and a habit of appearing in doorways at moments that suggested either extraordinary timing or an intimate knowledge of the household's rhythms, or perhaps both. He had found her in the garden on her third morning. She had been trying to identify the forsythia, which she had not seen before in her gardening experience, which had been conducted primarily in the red laterite soil conditions of Enugu and Abuja, and was therefore not well equipped for Korean ornamental trees. "That's a white forsythia," Seo-jun said from behind her. She turned. He was standing at the garden door in his school clothes, bag on his back, ready to leave, apparently having redirected himself from the front door specifically to provide this information.
"Thank you," she said.
"It blooms in March," he said. "My mom liked it." A pause. The morning air was cool and smelled of the hill behind the garden and the forsythia, which had a faint, clean smell she had not previously been able to identify. "Does it need cutting back?" she said. Seo-jun considered this with the gravity of a child who takes botanical questions seriously. "No," he said. "It just needs the space it's in." He left for school. She stood in the garden and looked at the forsythia and thought about a thing that needs only the space it's in. The night nurse appeared in the garden door. "Mr. Park's car is ready, Ms. Adaeze. He asks if you've seen his conference portfolio." "It's on the left side of the study desk," she said. "Under the infrastructure reports. I moved it slightly when I dusted the lamp. I apologize. I should have left a note." The night nurse looked at her with an expression that was not quite surprise and not quite relief, but something that partook of both. "3 weeks," she said, which was not a complete sentence, but was entirely comprehensible. "3 weeks." Adaeze said. "The portfolio," the nurse said. "He's been putting it in slightly different places for 3 weeks, and then looking for it. You're the first one to notice where he puts it." She was the first one to notice where he put it because she was the first one, she suspected, who had been paying the kind of attention that required. The specific attention of someone who understood that a house's details were not incidental but were, in fact, the main text. She went inside.
She started the tea.
She thought about what it meant to pay that kind of attention and whether she should be more careful about what she was doing with it. The child understood things that his father had not yet said. She had noticed this by the end of her second week. Seo-jun had the specific intelligence of children who have grown up in households where important things are managed rather than spoken, where the air between adults contains information that the adults believe is not audible. He had learned, as such children do, to read that air with the precision of a trained meteorologist reading weather patterns. He knew things about his house and his father and the quality of the mornings and the evenings that he had assembled entirely from observation, without anyone ever telling him. He told Adaeze, on the afternoon of her 19th day, that Tuesday was the hard day. They were sitting at the kitchen table. She was helping him with his Korean history homework, a task she had inherited without discussion from the previous housekeeper, apparently, because Seo-jun had appeared at the kitchen table with his books on the first Tuesday with the comfortable certainty of a child who knows where the homework happens. She had opened the books. She had helped. It had not occurred to either of them to discuss whether this was something she was supposed to do. Tuesday is the hard day, he said, when they had finished the homework and were still at the table because neither of them had moved yet. Hard how, she said. He thought about this for a moment. He was a precise child. He did not rush his language. The quiet gets heavier, he said. On Tuesdays. Like it weighs more. She looked at him. Do you know why? He looked at the table. Mom died on a Tuesday, he said. In March. I don't remember it, but Dad does. She was quiet for a moment. He keeps her candles burning, she said. Yes. He looked up at her. You keep them burning too. Even on days when there isn't a dinner or anything. You light them yourself. Is that all right? He nodded. She'd like it, he said. With the certainty of a child who has decided what a parent would have liked, and then held that decision without question. They sat in the kitchen and the cedarwood smell came from the reception hall, and she thought about a woman who had laughed with her eyes closed, and the man who had learned to keep her candles burning after she was gone, and the child who carried both of them with the solemnity and grace of someone who has never known a world in which loss was not also just part of the furniture. You're safe, Seo-jun said. She looked at him. I mean you're a safe person, he said. I can tell. Some people feel safe and some people don't, and you feel safe. He paused. My mom was safe too. Dad isn't unsafe, he's like the house. He keeps everything in order. But safe is different from in order. She felt something move in her chest that she kept very carefully in its place. Thank you, Seo-jun, she said. You can call me June, he said. My mom called me June. He picked up his pencil and began drawing something on the corner of his notebook. Did your mom call you something different from Adaeze? Adaeze, she said. My dad called me Adaeze. He looked up. Called?
Passed. He died, she said.
5 years ago. June looked at her for a moment with his father's eyes, the direct, comprehensive, searching eyes, and then looked back at his notebook. We have the same thing then, he said. Quietly.
Not sadly.
With the matter-of-fact precision of a child who has learned to locate common ground rather than dwell on its reasons. Yes, she said. We do. He finished his drawing. He turned the notebook so she could see. It was a house, roughly but unmistakably rendered. The Park Estate, with its 4 floors and the garden and the forsythia, which he had drawn as a large, enthusiastic circle of flowers taking up considerably more space than the house itself. In the garden, he had drawn 2 small figures. She didn't ask who they were. Subscribe, June knows. He always knew. Drop a comment. 3 months into the arrangement, which was not an arrangement, which was a job, which was a contract, which was the practical mathematics of a situation she needed to be clear-eyed about at all times, they had developed a language. It was not a language of words. Words, in the Park Estate, were used carefully and for specific purposes, and neither of them was a person who used them imprecisely. The language they had developed was the other kind, the language of things noticed and left unremarked, of things done without being named, of the 3 centimeters of space that existed between them in the kitchen and the study and the garden, and the specific, narrow geography of a household that required them to occupy the same rooms at significant moments. He had begun taking his morning tea in the kitchen. She had not commented on this. The study had always been the morning tea location, The documentation from the previous housekeeper was very clear on this point, and she had maintained it as a matter of professional fidelity for the first 2 months. Then, on a Tuesday in October, he had appeared in the kitchen doorway while she was making the tea and had sat down at the table with the particular decisiveness of a man who has made a decision and is not going to discuss it, and she had put the tea in front of him and gone on with her work. He had been there every morning since. They talked. Not about anything significant, not at first. He talked about the Busan development project that was occupying most of his professional attention. The East Atrium's relationship to the rest of the building, the light angles in the upper floors, the way a building needed to negotiate with the hillside it was on rather than simply impose itself. She had noticed, in these conversations, that he talked about the buildings the way someone else might talk about people, with attention to their character, their needs, the things they were trying to be. She talked back. She talked about the garden, the forsythia, the drainage issues in the south corner, the fact that the roses near the service gate needed a specific kind of pruning that the previous gardener had apparently not known about. She talked about Seo-jun's homework, which had expanded to include science projects, and about Biscuit, the caterpillar that June had been monitoring in the garden for 6 days. She did not talk about her brother. She did not talk about Emmanuel, 26 years old, brilliant, exhausted, in his second semester at Yonsei's biochemistry program, surviving on ramen and the specific, desperate optimism of a person who has been given one extremely expensive chance. She did not talk about the calls from their mother, which arrived on Sunday evenings and contained information she was skilled at receiving without her face changing. She did not talk about the fact that most of her salary was going to Emmanuel. She did not talk about these things because they were not relevant to the professional relationship and because she was not, by inclination, a person who shared the weight she was carrying unless there was someone both willing and able to carry a portion of it, and that was not what this was. She told herself this clearly.
She was precise about it.
He was precise about different things. He was precise about the barley tea. She had found a new supplier in Insadong, same strain, better price, and had tried it in a cup she left on the kitchen counter with a note that said only, alternative source, same strain, for your consideration. She had not said anything further. 2 days later, the Insadong delivery had arrived at the estate. He had not said anything either. They had both, in this way, conducted an entire conversation about trust and consideration without using any words at all. He was precise about the windows. She had noticed, in her second month, that she always left the study window open exactly 2 inches on mornings after days that had been heavy, not with weather, but with the specific, accumulated weight of a difficult week. She had not consciously established this practice. It had emerged the way some practices do, from the kind of attentiveness that operates below the level of decision. She had noticed it once she was already doing it. He had said nothing. But on the mornings when she had forgotten, when the week had been ordinary rather than heavy, she would find, when she came to dust the study at midday, that the window had been open to exactly 2 inches. He had noticed that she noticed. She had noticed that he noticed that she noticed. This was the language. It had no vocabulary and no grammar and no rules, only the ongoing, mutual, completely unacknowledged practice of paying each other the kind of attention that is usually reserved for things you have decided matter. She told herself, clearly and with precision, this is not what it seems. The kitchen table said otherwise. The 3 centimeters said otherwise. The cedarwood candles that she lit without being asked, and, he maintained, without comment said otherwise. She told herself clearly anyway. She was good at telling herself things clearly. Drop a comment. Have you ever been in a situation where you knew but couldn't say you knew?
Tell me.
She found the box on a Thursday in October at 11:30 a.m., taking inventory of the dry goods pantry. It was a shoebox, white, with the logo of a children's shoe brand. It should not have been there. It was clearly not kitchen equipment, clearly personal, clearly not something she was supposed to open. She opened it with the care of someone who understands that wrong discoveries require the same respect as right ones. Inside, a woman's bracelet, gold chain with small jade beads, the clasp slightly bent in the way of something worn regularly and removed carefully over a long period of time. A child's drawing in wax crayon, 3 figures, labeled in the uncertain Korean characters of a child who is beginning to write, APPA, which meant father, and OMMA, which meant mother, and JUN, which meant June. The figures were not anatomically accurate. They were recognizable anyway. A photograph, folded once along a vertical line. A couple at what was clearly the first snow of some winter, breath visible in the cold air. The woman's face turned toward the camera at the precise moment of being surprised into joy. Adaeze looked at the photograph for a long time. She looked at the woman, Song Yuri, whom she knew from the photograph on the study shelf and from the cedarwood candles and from Seo-jun's face, which was a version of his mother's face with his father's eyes. She looked at the joy in the photograph, which was not a posed joy but a caught one, the kind that only arrives when you are not ready for it. She thought about what it meant to put these things in a pantry shoebox. Not on a shelf. Not in a study drawer. In the pantry, behind the rice, where they would not be found by accident unless someone was taking inventory with the methodical thoroughness of someone who paid attention to everything. She thought about the architecture of grief. The way some people built structures around it, clean, load-bearing, functional, and maintained those structures with great care and at great cost, because the alternative was to have it everywhere, unsupported, collapsing on the people nearby. She put the bracelet back. She put the drawing back. She folded the photograph along its original line and put it back. She replaced the shoebox behind the bulk rice in precisely the position she had found it. She sat down on the pantry floor. She did not plan to cry. She sat on the floor of the pantry on a Thursday morning in October and cried, quietly and completely, for the woman in the photograph and the child who was learning to write 3 names and the man who had put these things in a shoebox because he did not yet know what else to do with them, and she cried because the weight of it, not her weight, their weight, the specific gravity of a house carrying a loss it did not fully know how to name, was, at 11:30 a.m. on a Thursday, more than she had anticipated being in the middle of. She did not hear the door open. She heard, instead, the specific quality of Park Ji-ho's presence, the way the air in a room adjusted around him, the way the atmosphere made a small, silent concession in the direction of his gravity. She became aware that she was not alone. The pantry, which was not large, had become a different kind of space. She did not move for a moment. She wiped her face with the back of her hand. She stood up. She turned around. He was in the doorway. He had come home early. She had not expected him before 3, and it was not yet noon, and he was still in his coat, which meant he had come directly here. He had been here for some portion of her crying, which portion she could not determine from his expression because his expression was doing the specific thing it did when it was containing several things at once. "I apologize," she said. "I found the box by accident. I would never have." "Don't apologize," he said. His voice was different from his usual voice. Not softer, exactly, not a man who did softness as a register, but something in it that was less maintained, like the window that she left open 2 inches. A pause. The pantry held them both, and the cedarwood smell came from the hall, and outside the kitchen window the forsythia was visible against the pale October sky. "She would have liked you," he said. He said it simply. Not as a declaration of anything. Not as a statement requiring a response. Just a thing that was true and that he had decided, in this moment, to say. And then, as if completing a thought he had begun somewhere else, Seo-jun already does. He left. He left her in the pantry with the photograph in its shoebox behind the rice and the bracelet with the bent clasp and the drawing of 3 figures and the cedarwood smell and the forsythia and the specific, rearranging sensation of being seen by someone who is not looking for you. She stood there for a long time. Then she went and started lunch. She found the files on a Wednesday morning in November. She had been in the study returning a book, one of June's, which had migrated from the library to the kitchen table in the way of children's books everywhere, and the folder had been on the desk in the spot where things were placed when they were awaiting attention. She would have put the book down and left immediately except that the name on the folder stopped her so completely that her body simply ceased its movement. Okonkwo, Emmanuel C. Her brother's full name, his Nigerian national identification number, and his Yonsei University registration number, his student ID, which was not a piece of information available in any public record, which required either institutional access or a more determined kind of research, and a photograph that had been taken from a distance, in Sinchon, near the apartment she knew her brother lived in. She turned the page. A background report. Detailed, thorough, the kind that required resources she could not quite calculate. She turned another page. A financial summary. Emmanuel Okonkwo's scholarship package, itemized. The gap between his scholarship coverage and his actual living expenses, calculated with the precision of someone who had taken genuine care with the arithmetic. She turned another page. A property record. The Seoul apartment, including the landlord's name and the current terms of the lease. She turned to the 5th page. The letter was on Park Industries' letterhead. It was addressed to the Dean of Graduate Studies at Yonsei University. It authorized a supplementary scholarship fund for Emmanuel Chukwuemeka Okonkwo in the amount sufficient to cover living expenses, textbooks, and incidental costs for the full duration of his graduate program. It cited, as its stated rationale, a commitment to international academic excellence and the exceptional promise of the recipient. The formal language was careful and thorough and gave nothing away about its actual origin. It was signed with Park Ji-ho's personal seal. The date on the letter was 3 weeks ago. 3 weeks ago, which was the week after the board dinner. Which was the week after she had saved a man's life in a reception hall in the wrong shoes. She stood in the study for a very long time. She thought about Emmanuel, who was too proud to tell her how badly he was managing, who sent her texts that said fine every time she asked how the money was going, who had stopped calling as frequently because she knew from the frequency of his calls when he was managing and when he was not, and fewer calls meant fewer opportunities for her to determine which it was. She thought about the Insidong supplier. The window left 2 inches open. The first aid kit on the kitchen counter. She thought about a man who read Igbo etymology at 11:30 at night because there was a woman whose name he wanted to understand before he met her. She put the file back exactly as she had found it. Exactly, the angle, the position relative to the desk's edge, the other documents on top of it. She was very precise about this. She went to the kitchen. She made barley tea. She sat at the kitchen table and held the cup and thought about what it meant to do something for someone without telling them. What it meant to see a thing that needed doing and do it quietly, without acknowledgement, without the transaction of gratitude. She was still at the table when she heard his key in the door. She did not move. He came into the kitchen. He saw her. He stopped. She looked at him across the kitchen table with the barley tea between them, and she said, without preamble, without any of the professional buffer she had been maintaining for 3 months. Thank you. He was very still for a moment. For what? He said, carefully. You know for what, she said. The silence between them was the longest and fullest she had experienced in this kitchen, which had been the site of a number of full silences. He came to the table. He sat down. She put a cup of tea in front of him, and he held it in both hands the way he always held things, steadily, deliberately, as if the act of holding required the same attention as everything else. I should have told you, he said. You didn't have to, she said. I wanted to. He looked at the tea. I found out about your brother in the 2nd week. I wasn't, he paused, selecting the precise word. I wasn't conducting research on your personal circumstances. I was verifying your references, and the verification turned up his enrollment. The gap in his funding was, he stopped. It was visible to anyone paying attention. You were paying attention, she said. Yes, he said. She held her cup. The tea was warm and the cedarwood smell was everywhere, and outside the kitchen window the forsythia had lost its last leaves for the season and stood bare against the November sky, very straight, occupying exactly the space it needed. My father worked in security, she said after a moment. In Lagos. Private contracts. I know, he said. She looked at him. I know more than you think, he said. About your father. He looked at his tea. And about how you came to be here, and what it has cost your family, and why you haven't said any of it. He paused. I've been trying to find the right moment to tell you something. Something that I found in my father's records. She waited. My father did infrastructure work in West Africa in the 90s, he said. Early Park Industries. Before the company became what it is now. He kept records, detailed ones, more detailed than he needed to, I think because he understood that what he built would outlast him, and he wanted to be accountable to it. He looked at the table. In 1994, in Lagos, his lead negotiator was taken. The vehicle, the wrong route, the wrong moment. Standard criminal operation, not targeted. The negotiator was retrieved within 48 hours. Unhurt.
He paused.
My father's records attribute the rapid resolution to a security contractor who was on site for a different contract. A man who identified the risk before it materialized and had already prepared a contingency that made the resolution possible. She was very still. The contractor's name, he said, was Adaeze Okonkwo. The kitchen was very quiet. She became aware of small things. The sound of the barley tea cooling, the temperature of the cup in her hands, the fact that the forsythia outside the window was still in the exact position it had always been in, occupying its space without apology.
My father, she said.
Yes. He never told me. He may not have known whose father he was. The records are thorough, but the connection, he paused. The connection between Adaeze Okonkwo's daughter and Park Ji-ho's housekeeper is not a connection that presents itself obviously. Not until you pay a certain kind of attention. Which you paid, she said. Which I paid, he said. After the board dinner. After I understood what kind of attention you had paid, in a reception hall, on a night when most people were simply attending a dinner. She looked at him across the table. This man she had been maintaining 3 centimeters of distance from for 3 months, this man whose house she had been learning like a language, this man who had put her brother's scholarship in a file and signed it with his seal and left it on a desk where she would find it when she returned a book. You could have told me, she said. I know, he said. He stopped. He tried again. The architectural expression did something she had not seen it do. It became uncertain, not afraid, not weak, but the specific, load-bearing uncertainty of a man who has carried something alone for a long time and is not sure how to set it down. I was not sure it was the right thing to do. The connection. Whether telling you created an obligation you hadn't chosen. Whether it changed the nature of what this, he stopped. Of what this is, she said. Yes, he said. They sat with that for a moment.
Subscribe right now.
What comes next is going to matter. Drop a comment before we go any further. The call came from her aunt in Lagos on a Friday night in November. Her aunt's voice had the specific quality of someone who has been holding something in for several days and has reached the limit of how long holding is possible. She said, Emeka Obi is in Seoul. Adaeze was in the service room, small, clean, sufficient, with a window that looked onto the garden and the forsythia, now bare, and she sat very still on the edge of her bed and said, Tell me. The story her aunt told had the shape of things that are not surprising when they arrive, because you have been, at some level, expecting them without knowing you were expecting them. Emeka Obi was 60 years old and had been her father's business partner from the company's earliest days. He had also, in the complicated financial architecture of the security firm's final years, been the reason for its collapse, not through dramatic betrayal, which would have been simpler to address, but through the accumulation of small decisions made in his own interest that had quietly, systematically undermined the firm's financial foundations until the collapse arrived as a natural consequence of a structure that had been rendered unreliable. Her father had known and had, in the way of some men, chosen to believe that the partnership was reparable, that Emeka was redeemable, that the damage was manageable, until it was not. The debt that had followed the firm's collapse had been Emeka Obi's debt at its origin. It had become, through a series of mechanisms that she had spent years understanding and that her father had not lived long enough to fully resolve, a debt that attached to the Okonkwo family. Her aunt said, He has been asking about you. He knows where you work. Adaeze thanked her aunt. She said goodnight. She held her phone for a long moment after the call ended and thought about the geometry of this, what it meant, what it cost, what it was going to require. She thought, I will handle this myself. She thought, I will not bring this into this house. She thought, Emmanuel is at Yonsei, dependent on a fund signed with Park Ji-ho's seal, and if Emeka Obi is asking about me and knows where I work, he knows exactly how to apply leverage. She thought, last, and she tried very hard not to think this but thought it anyway. He saw me cry in a pantry and said she would have liked you and left a first aid kit on a kitchen counter and found my brother's scholarship gap in the second week. She put her phone down. She got up. She walked to the kitchen. Ji-ho was there. This was not unusual. He was frequently in the kitchen at unusual hours, at the kitchen table with papers or with nothing, with a specific quality of presence that suggested he was not there because he had nowhere else to be, but because he had made a deliberate choice about where the real geography of the house was. She had come to understand that Park Ji-ho, for all the executive authority of his public life, was a man who organized his internal world around a kitchen table.
He was at the table now.
A glass of water. No papers. He looked up when she came in. "You're awake," he said. "I need to tell you something," she said. He was very still for a moment. "Then, sit down." She sat. She told him. She told him about Emeka Obi, the partnership, the debt, the collapse of her father's firm, the years of managing and renegotiating, the specific, exhausting arithmetic of a family that had been managing a situation that was not of its making for the better part of a decade. He listened. He listened with the full, complete, architectural quality of his attention, the attention she had recognized from the kitchen and the study and the reception hall and the pantry, the attention of someone who is actually following the geography of what is being said. When she finished, he said, "He's been here for 10 days. She looked at him. "I've been monitoring him since last week," he said. "My security team identified an unusual pattern of inquiry near the estate. I instructed them to track it. I had not yet identified the connection to you." He paused. "I apologize. I should have told you sooner."
"You were monitoring him," she said.
"I was monitoring a potential threat to the household," he said, "which turned out to be connected to you." Another pause. The particular pause of a man who has done something preemptive and is reckoning with whether the preemptiveness was appropriate. "I was going to tell you. I was trying to determine the correct way." She looked at him across the table. Ji-ho. He went slightly still at the use of his name, without the honorific. She had not intended it. It had simply arrived, the way some words do when the formal architecture has become inadequate. "My father left a debt," she said. "Not his debt at its origin, but his in the end. Emeka Obi is going to use that debt as leverage against this house." She paused. "Because I am here. Because I am connected to you. He'll threaten." "What does the debt amount to?" he said. Ji-ho. "The outstanding amount," he said. "I want to know what we're working with." She told him the number. It was not an enormous number in the arithmetic of Park Industries, she understood this, but it was an enormous number in the arithmetic of everything her family had been managing for 8 years, and saying it aloud in the kitchen at midnight felt like setting something down that she had not known she was still carrying until her arms felt different without it. He nodded. He picked up his phone. He made a call, brief, precise, conducted in the low voice he used when the instruction was clear and did not require emphasis. He ended the call. "By Monday," he said, "the debt will be settled. Fully documented." He put his phone on the table. "This is not a favor. This is the settlement of something that should have been settled before now, given what Isaiah Okonkwo did in 1994 for this family's company." He looked at her steadily. "I should have addressed this the moment I understood the connection." She was quiet for a moment. "Why didn't you?" she said. "Because," he said, very carefully, "I did not want you to feel that what is between us in this house is—" He stopped. He tried again. "I did not want the debt to be a reason for anything. I did not want you to feel obligated by it. I wanted—" He stopped again. "What did you want?" she said. The kitchen was very quiet. The cedarwood smell. The bare forsythia outside. Seo-jun asleep upstairs. The 30-year bridge between their fathers, spanning the distance neither of them had known they were crossing. "I wanted," he said, slowly, and with the precision of someone who has decided that this is worth getting right, "whatever happens between us to be something you chose. Freely. Without the arithmetic of obligation." He looked at the table. "I have not been clear about this. I have not been clear about—" He stopped. He looked at her. The architectural expression was doing what it did when it was insufficient. "I have not said what I mean. I've been managing the situation rather than speaking to it." "Say what you mean," she said. He looked at her for a long moment. "You are the most attentive person I have ever met," he said. "You see this house in a way that I had stopped being able to see it. You see June in a way that you make it easier for him to say what he means." You light her candles without being asked, and you leave the window open when the week has been heavy, and you found the photograph in the pantry, and you cried for a woman you never met. He paused. And I have been sitting 3 centimeters away from all of this for 3 months and calling it professional distance, and I am tired of the distance.
Subscribe right now.
This is the conversation. Don't miss a word of what comes next. He came on a Thursday morning when Seo-jun was home with a fever. The fever was mild, the kind that a child carries with enough energy to be entirely demanding and not enough energy to be entirely manageable. Jun had been moved to the living room with his fish books and a blanket and specific requests about the temperature of the soup and the angle of the television, and Adaeze had been managing all of these parameters with the calm efficiency of someone who is good at the specific arithmetic of sick children. Jiho had been scheduled for a board presentation at the Park Industries Tower at 9. She knew this because she had confirmed the car at 8 and sent his briefing notes with his coffee at 7:30. At 8:52, she received a message from Jiho. I'm not going in. Jun's fever. She read this and felt something in her chest that she kept in its place and went to update the driver. At 9:17, the gate intercom sounded. She answered it. On the small screen, a rental car, 2 men in the back, the driver with the practiced neutrality of a man being paid not to have an opinion. And in the frame of the car's rear window, the face she had last seen in Lagos, 15 years ago, at her father's funeral, the face of a man who had attended the funeral of the man he had ruined with the composure of someone who does not recognize the connection between cause and effect. Emeka Obi. She pressed the intercom button. She said, "This is a private residence. Please identify yourself and your business." His voice, older now, softer around its edges, but with the same specific quality she remembered, the voice of a man who has spent his life being received rather than refused, said, "Adaeze, it's Emeka. We have things to discuss."
We don't, she said.
"I think we do." A pause. "I think your employer would be very interested in our discussion, given the nature of some of the outstanding." "Mr. Obi," she said.
He paused.
"My employer is present," she said, "in this house. At this moment." She kept her voice completely even. "If you like to conduct this conversation with him directly, I can ask whether he's available." A longer pause. "That won't be necessary," Obi said. The voice had adjusted its register slightly. "I only wanted to." "I know what you wanted," she said. "Please leave." She released the intercom button. She stood at the service entrance for a moment and breathed. Then she went to the living room, where Jun was reading about deep-sea fish and monitoring her face with the attentive, comprehensive look of his father. "Someone came to the gate," he said. "Not a question." "Yes," she said. "They left." Was it something bad? She looked at him, 6 years old, with his father's eyes and his mother's capacity for the direct question. "It was something manageable," she said. He nodded. He went back to his fish book. She went to find Jiho. He was in the study. He had heard the intercom. The study was adjacent to the service entrance hall, and he was standing at the window looking at the garden with the expression that told her he had heard more than the intercom. "He's gone," she said. "I heard." He turned from the window. "The debt was settled on Monday." "I know. He has no leverage."
He knows that now, she said.
He looked at her. "Are you all right?" She considered the question honestly. "Yes," she said. "I was worried about the connection to you."
To Jun.
"The leverage through." "There is no leverage through me that he can use against you," Jiho said. "Very clearly. Very precisely. I want to be certain you understand that." She looked at him. "Whatever the nature of your situation," he said, "whatever the history between your family and his, it is not something that can be used as a weapon against you in this house. This house does not work that way." She felt the specific, unusual sensation of being protected. Not rescued. She had handled Emeka Obi at the gate herself, and they both knew it. Protected. The difference between the two things was significant. Protection was not rescue. Protection was, there is someone standing behind you who has already thought about the worst outcomes and done something about them. "I know," she said. "Thank you." He moved slightly. A small thing. Almost imperceptible. The 3 centimeters became, for a moment, 2. Adaeze, he said. Yes, she said. I said I was tired of the distance.
You did, she said.
I am still tired of it. She looked at him. This man who had built an architecture out of loss and was maintaining it with precision and care. This man who read Igbo etymology and left first aid kits on counters and had signed a seal to her brother's scholarship without saying a word. This man who was standing in his study with the forsythia visible in the window behind him and the cedarwood smell in the hall, and his son reading about fish in the living room. June is home today, she said. Yes. He needs his soup at the right temperature. I know. And his fish books need to be in a specific order, or he gets distracted. I know, he said. A small thing crossed his face. The thing that arrived the way Seo-jun's smile arrived, without preparation, without the architectural face to frame it. I know. He's very particular about the order. He is, she said. He gets it from you. Ji-ho looked at her. The thing on his face became something different, warmer, more yielding, the specific expression of a man who has been seen in the way that he has been seeing others and does not yet know what to do with being on the receiving end of it. Stay, he said. Not a command. A request. The quietest kind, the unrehearsed kind that arrives before you've decided whether it's safe to make it. I'm not going anywhere, she said. June needs lunch. After lunch, he said. She looked at him for a moment. After lunch, she said. The lunch was made and delivered at the correct temperature, and the fish books were arranged in the order that June required, and the soup was consumed with the focused appreciation of a child who has spent a morning being sick and is now, at the critical hour of 11:30, beginning the recovery that will allow him, by afternoon, to be fully himself again. Ji-ho sat on the living room floor beside his son for the duration of lunch. He did not do this regularly. The floor of the living room was not a typical location for Park Ji-ho's midday hours, but he sat there with the particular, deliberate quality of a man who has decided where he should be and has gone there without discussion. June looked at his father. He looked at Adaeze in the kitchen doorway. He looked at his father again with a comprehensive, searching, 6-year-old assessment that had been locating safety in rooms since he was old enough to understand that safety was a thing worth locating. He said, to no one in particular, in a voice that was mostly recovered and therefore more decisive than his morning voice. Adaeze should live here. She does live here, Ji-ho said. Properly, June said. Not in the service room. In the house. Like family. A silence that had weight. June, Ji-ho said. I know what I'm saying, June said. With the certainty of a child who has thought about this for longer than the adults are aware of. I've been thinking about it. Since the pantry. Adaeze was very still in the kitchen doorway. Since the pantry, Ji-ho repeated. I saw her crying, June said. He looked at Adaeze directly. I was getting a glass of water, and I saw you in the pantry. I didn't come in because you were having a private feeling. But I know what the pantry means. He looked at his father. I put the box in there. 3 years ago. Because I didn't want it in my room anymore. It made me sad, but I didn't want it thrown away. So, I put it somewhere it would be kept. Ji-ho was very still. You put it there, he said. Yes. He stopped. I've been wondering how it got there. I put it there, June said again, with the patience of a child explaining something that seemed very clear to him. Because I wanted it kept but not looked at. And Adaeze found it and cried because it was sad, which is the right response to something sad. He picked up his soup spoon again. So she should live here properly. Because the people who cry for the right reasons are the safe people. The living room was very quiet. Adaeze looked at Seo-jun. This child who had put his mother's things in a pantry shoebox because he wanted them kept but not looked at, who had found the right person for the right reasons before either of the adults had found the right words. She felt something move through her that was not containable, that had no professional category, that was simply the specific, rearranging experience of being understood by a child who had made his assessment 6 weeks ago and had only now found the right moment to report it.
June, she said.
He looked at her. That was a very clear and complete observation, she said. I know, he said. He went back to his soup. Dad makes observations, he said between spoonfuls. I make observations too. It's something we have. Jiho was looking at his son with the expression that arrived when the architecture was not required. Not the widower face, not the CEO face, not the load-bearing structure he maintained through the difficult hours of difficult days. Just the face of a man who has, in the space of a soup-temperature conversation, been seen by his 6-year-old son and is, for the first time in a very long time, not afraid of what being seen reveals. Yes, he said. It's something we have. He looked at Adaeze. She looked back at him. After lunch, he said. After lunch, she said. After lunch, June was installed on the living room couch with his fish books and a second blanket and the precise, comfortable arrangement of a child who has said what he needed to say and can now devote himself fully to anglerfish taxonomy. After lunch, she and Jiho sat at the kitchen table. Not the 3 centimeters. Not the professional distance. The actual table, with 2 cups of barley tea and the afternoon light coming through the kitchen window, and the forsythia bear outside and Seo-jun occasionally saying something from the living room about bioluminescence. The scholarship, she said. Yes, he said. You did that without telling me. Yes. You've been doing many things without telling me. He looked at his tea. He paused. He tried again. I was trying to find the correct order, the correct sequence. The things that needed to be done, and then the things that needed to be said, and I miscalibrated the timing. He looked at her. I was treating this the way I treat a project, managing the variables in the optimal sequence. This doesn't work that way. No, she said. It doesn't. I know that, he said. I have known it for a while. Another pause. It's easier to manage things than to say them. I have a great deal of practice with managing things. And very little with saying them, she said. Very little, he said. She held her teacup. The afternoon was quiet except for June's occasional anglerfish commentary and the sound of the city below the hill, organized and persistent, the way cities are. My brother called last week, she said. He said his supervisor pulled him aside. Said there'd been an anonymous supplementary fund allocation in his name. He cried on the phone. She paused. Emmanuel doesn't cry. He's too practical. He didn't let me hear it for long, but I heard it. Jiho was quiet. He said, someone sees me, she said. That's what he said. Through the crying, that's what he said. She looked at Jiho across the table. Someone sees me, she repeated quietly. I have been thinking about that since he said it, about what it means to be seen, about what it costs the person who does the seeing, the attention it requires, the willingness to act on what you observe even when acting is inconvenient, even when it would be simpler not to. She paused. You have been seeing this household for a very long time. You see June. You see the weight of Tuesdays. You see the forsythia and the candles and the photograph on the 3rd shelf. She paused again. She stopped. What would you like, he said. Very quietly. I would like, she said, to see you back. She looked at him directly. Not as the employer. Not the estate. You. He looked at her for a long moment. Longer than any of the previous long moments, and there had been many. That terrifies me, he said. Plainly. Without architecture. I know, she said. The last time I let someone, he stopped. She died, and the silence was very specific. It had a shape. I've been maintaining the shape of it because if it changes then, he stopped again. Then she's further away, Adaeze said. Yes. She won't be, she said. The candles are still there. The photograph is still there. June is there every day. She's in the architecture of this house in ways that don't require me to be absent. She paused. I'm not asking you to let go of her. I'm asking you to let me be here. That's a different thing. He was very still. Then, she would have argued with you, he said, about whether it's a different thing. She liked to argue about the structure of things, whether you could separate the parts from the whole. He looked at his hands. She usually won. Did you like arguing with her? Very much, he said. He looked up. Something moved across his face. Not grief, exactly, or not only grief. Something that held grief and something else at the same time, the way a room can hold 2 temperatures at once when a window is open. She would have liked you. You said that before, she said. In the pantry. I meant it then, he said. I mean it more precisely now.
He paused.
She would have liked the shoes. The scuffed flats. She always said you could tell everything about a person by whether they bought practical shoes. Adaeze looked down at her feet. She was right, she said. He laughed. It was a genuine, unguarded sound. Not loud, not dramatic, but completely real. The laugh of a man who has not laughed from that particular depth in a long time, and is, in this moment, surprised by his own capacity for it. The architecture dropped. Not permanently. It would come back. She knew this. It would be necessary again. The load-bearing structure of a man who manages a household and a company and a grief and a child. But for this moment, in this kitchen, at this table, it was not present, and what was present instead was simply the person. Adaeze, he said. She looked at him. Will you stay? He said. Not as the, he stopped. He tried again. Will you stay here? With us? She thought about the pantry. She thought about the first aid kit. She thought about the scholarship letter with his seal. She thought about the file on the desk left where she would find it when she returned a book. She thought about a man who read the etymology of names and left windows open 2 inches and sat on the kitchen floor at 2 a.m. to hear the geometry of a thing she had been carrying alone. She thought about June, in the living room, who had put his mother's things in a shoebox because he wanted them kept and had known, 6 weeks before either of them did, who was the safe one. For as long as you want, she said. He reached across the 3 centimeters, across the 2 centimeters, across the 1 centimeter, across all the distance, and took her hand. His grip was steady. The capable hands of a man who holds things carefully. From the living room, June's voice. Dad.
Adaeze.
Come look. The anglerfish makes its own light. In the dark. It doesn't need anything else to see. They looked at each other. We're coming, Jiho said. They went. The forsythia bloomed in March. White flowers, very small, very many, covering the branches with the complete and unhurried abundance of a thing that has been waiting for the right season. June stood in the garden and looked at it with the comprehensive satisfaction of someone whose predictions have been vindicated. I told you, he said. March. You told me, Adaeze agreed. Emmanuel had visited in February, a long weekend, his supervisor having approved the absence with the specific generosity of a man who understands that a graduate student with good news needs to share it. He had arrived at the Park estate with the expression of someone who has rehearsed his composure and shed it within the first 20 minutes. He had shaken Jiho's hand and said, very quietly, the thing that Adaeze had heard in fragments on the phone. Thank you. She doesn't know how to ask for things. She never has. And Jiho had said, she didn't need to ask, and Emmanuel had understood exactly what that meant. They had eaten together in the kitchen, all of them, and June had explained anglerfish to Emmanuel with the full seriousness of a 7-year-old who has found in every available adult a new audience for deep-sea taxonomy, and Emmanuel had listened with the genuine attention of a biochemist who appreciates well-presented biological data. And Adaeze had sat at the kitchen table and watched her brother in her kitchen and felt the specific, complicated fullness of a life that has arrived, through many practical and impractical decisions at something it had not known it was moving toward. The debt was gone. The documentation was in a file she kept in her room, not the service room, her room, which was on the 2nd floor with a window that looked onto the garden and the forsythia and the east wall of the estate. Her mother had called on the Sunday of Emmanuel's visit. She had said, in the direct and practical way that Adaeze had inherited, "Are you happy?" And Adaeze had said, in the same direct and practical way, because she was her mother's daughter, "Yes." And her mother had been quiet for a moment, the specific quality of silence that a mother makes when the answer is one she has been hoping for, and then had said, "Good. Your father would say the same." In the garden in March, with the forsythia in bloom, and June cataloging the flowers with the seriousness of a child who takes blooming seriously, Jiho came to stand beside her. He took her hand. His grip was the same, steady, deliberate, the grip of a man who holds things carefully and has decided that this is a thing worth holding. "Adaeze," June said, without turning from the forsythia. "Do you think it knows it's beautiful?" She looked at the forsythia. Very straight, very white, occupying exactly the space it needed. "I think it doesn't need to know," she said. "It just is." June considered this. "That's a good answer," he said. Dad, she gave a good answer. She usually does, Jiho said. The forsythia bloomed. The cedarwood candles burned in the rooms where Song Yuri had loved them. The photograph stayed on the third shelf, acknowledged, not avoided, recognized, not mourned past recognizing. The house held all of it, the grief and the beginning, the loss and the 1 centimeter of space that had become no space at all, the 30-year bridge between 2 fathers and the daughter who found her way across it in the wrong shoes. This is not the end. This is the beginning of what lasts. Subscribe and turn on notifications. The next story in this world is waiting for you.